I hope that there were like 3 erasers in here, but no, there's not one at all. Let me go see if I can steal one for next one. The sex and gender chapter and intro. There, I was just getting this wide when I go through just the sexual stuff and like, yeah, you know, like you can be XXY and you can have vague organs and they just look, why? All right, it's 10. I don't know where everybody else is, but that is okay. Do this real quick. Yucky day. A lot of people might be kind of taking it easy. I have not had the time to sit down and actually fix our schedule. If you look at the syllabus, there's an extra Monday in this week. I don't know what it's. And I like read it over like 3 times before I printed it, and of course I missed it. So basically everything will just kind of get shifted. And so I will work on that and have that for y'all by Friday, essentially. So we are probably not doing the discussion date Friday. Friday, we'll do it instead on Monday. Just because it takes a while to go through Freud, good old Freud, so. Yeah, I'm just gonna check in everybody who just got here. Okay. Double check, no one else signed on to Zoom. Glad I checked, somebody did. Okay, so what I was just saying for folks who just walked in is that if you look at this week on the syllabus, for some reason, there's an extra Monday. I don't know why. And so I am going to fix the schedule, but I haven't had a chance yet. So by Friday, I'll have an updated version of the schedule. As soon as I have it, I'll also post it to Blackboard and send it to you all so you know what's going on. Your tests, I probably will not get to grade until this weekend, but I will try to be efficient with those. Typically I'm able to use Tuesdays for a lot more of that stuff, but I had a lot of stuff just shoved into my Tuesday yesterday, so that did not happen. All right. But we are going to pick back on up with Freud. And so just to kind of give us a context of where we left off, we were talking about this life force or libido and the thanatos or death force. And libido is where Freud himself ended up focusing the most of his research, his writing, and he linked urges like the libido, like your life force, to the body. And again, he was a neurologist, he did some neuroscientific research. And so in his mind, this was another piece of him trying to be scientific about things. Unfortunately, as we'll see, it's not so much, right? But he was trying. Gold star for trying, Freud. In particular, he looked at what he called erotogenic zones. And so these are parts of the body that are naturally sensitive to excitement. And as such, Freud assumed that each of these areas that was naturally sensitive to excitement was also going to naturally generate tension and be related to these life instincts in particular. So these are zones of the body that are naturally sensitive, and Freud said, aha, that must mean there's tension in it. And this is how Freud continued to develop his theory of dynamic consciousness and unconsciousness while looking at how it related to the body. He's also felt like he saw the past pulling people back. As he was working with the clients, he felt like a lot of them were just like kind of obsessed with stuff in their past, right? That's what they would dwell on. And so he started looking at that developmentally and said, how does what happened in the past influence what's going on for people in the present? And so Freud came up with his psychosexual stages of development. And he saw these as physical prototypes for psychological issues. Physical prototypes for psychological issues. He said this is a natural progression that everyone goes through in their life. He said that the evolution of each person recapitulates the evolution of the species. So I mentioned that Darwin was alive when Freud was alive. I forgot that Origin of Species, I think. Darwin's seminal work was published in 1856, which was the year Freud was born. So Freud was born into this world that was studying evolution and coming to terms with it. All of Europe was influenced by Darwin at this point. And so when Freud starts theorizing, that's going to influence him as well. So Freud said at each stage, each of these psychosexual stages, conflicts are going to arise. And it is the way that you resolve that conflict that's going to shape your personality and shape your development. If the conflict is not fully resolved, you can get stuck in that stage. And Freud called that fixation. You were fixated or stuck at that stage. And he said that fixation leads to a less mature approach to life in general, but in particular, again, because these are psychosexual stages, to obtaining sexual gratification. If all the conflicts are resolved, adults will obtain pleasure from healthy, intimate relationships, but also from work. And these stages are oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. You don't have to scribble those down. We're going to go through each one. And I also have a handy dandy chart, so I'm going to give to each of you here. For folks on Zoom, this is under announcements on Blackboard. But not really, I guess that's going to be true. For folks in person, if you want to look at a digital copy of this, you can look under announcements on our Blackboard. Yeah, so it's under announcements on Blackboard. Okay. One of the things that's on your chart is Erickson's refinements. So this is Erik Erikson. Yes, his parents did that to him, poor thing. And he went through each of Freud's stages and looked at the conflicts, the main conflicts. So Freud had talked about there being conflict at each stage, and Erikson said, well, let's define what those conflicts are. And so he looked at these crises at each stage, and so those are on your chart as well. And Erikson argued that these crises and the resolution of each crisis, how you solve it, is going to affect the unconscious themes that will shape your life, not only as a child, but as you grow into adulthood, and the ego strengths, which affects the way the child views themselves and the world. So ego strengths are abilities you have, confidence in yourself. And so Erikson was like, well, this is going to affect that. So the Freudian stages, you've probably learned these in intro, or if you've taken other courses that discuss Freud. They're weird. I'm gonna just fully acknowledge that this is the weirdest part of Freud's theory. And particularly the Oedipal phase. But this whole idea of these being sexual is how, like, every single one of Freud's students disagreed with him. They broke with him and they were like, no, no, just Freud, no, right? So even other psychoanalysts, other psychodynamic theorists knew this is weird, right? Fully acknowledging that. I will also, though, try to give Freud the benefit of the doubt and try to find the seeds of things as we go through these. So the first is the oral stage. And one of the things I will say is that if you read different psychology textbooks, they will sometimes give you different year cutoffs for these things. Like sometimes they'll be like the oral stage is 0 to 2 years or 0 to 18 months. And it doesn't really matter, right? It's just like vaguely knowing the order is what's most important. Here, Freud argued that the mouth is the source of the libido. The mouth is the source of either pleasure or conflict. So babies being breastfed, for example, crying to communicate because it's the only way they have to communicate at first. And so the source of pleasure or the source of tension or the reduction of that tension is the mouth, the lips, the tongue. And again, if we try to think like, where did Freud get these crazy ideas? What's the first thing a kid does if you hand them something at this age? Yeah, they try to put it in their mouth. That's right. You can't give kids small stuff at this age, right? Because they might choke on it. And so, yeah, okay, we can see that, right? They're exploring the world through their mouths. We can also think of things like pacifiers, right? Being used as a soothing mechanism, or kids sucking their thumbs. The mouth is not only the source of pleasure or tension or reduction of that tension, it's also the source of how they understand and discover their world. Freud said there are a couple different conflicts here. One is weaning. He argued the id wants nourishment. And if you're not familiar with what weaning is, I just realized like not everybody might know what that means. It's essentially where you transition a child off of its mother's milk and to maybe solid foods or other types of milk, formula, cow's milk, things like that. All mammals do this in some way. Some are more aggressive than others. Horses and cows, when they're trying to wean their kids, will actually give them like gentle kicks to get them to stop. I don't know if anyone else has seen this little viral video going around, but there's a mama cat and she goes and gets her bag of food and carries it over and plops it in the bed with her kittens. Look, I'm just done. You guys eat this, right? And they look developmentally old enough to probably eat it. But, you know, that's weeding right there, right? And so the idea here is there might be excessive pleasure or dependency, right? If you don't wean, there's this worry that, like, will the kid get too dependent? A few years back, there were a lot of articles. I want to say there was one on the cover of Time magazine about people who breastfeed much longer. And like, in a lot of cultures, they do this on purpose, right? There are a lot of cultures where kids are breastfed until maybe they're 3 or 4, but that's because that's the best way to get them nutrition when there's scarce food, right? There were some people in that Time article who were still breastfeeding at like age 8. Far be it for me to judge another parent, but I don't know about that one. We'll just put it that way, right? So this idea of maybe being too dependent, a fear of not being able to defend for yourself. And then the conflict here can also be biting, right? It's fun for the kid to bite things, but if they're breastfeeding, that's not acceptable, right, for moms. And painful, especially when they start getting teeth in. So if you look at your handout here, you'll see that it talks about ways to get rid of tension here. Sucking, like sucking your thumb, swallowing, biting, but also looking, grasping, and touching because you're trying to explore your world. We talked about weaning being a key task or experience. The Ericksonian stage here, or crisis, is trust versus mistrust. Can you trust that your parents will come and help you, right? If you start crying because you're hungry, do your parents get there in a reasonable amount of time, all right, and support you? There's also the idea that, again, as Freud mentioned, fixation. You might get stuck at these stages. What happens if you get stuck at the oral stage? Well, Freud actually came up with character types. So you would have an oral personality. These folks tend to be dependent, demanding, gullible, jealous. Their theme is I get, right? I need to get what I get. Again, remember, like, the id is the primary driver at this point in time, that Cookie Monster. Now, one thing that I'll say, this last column of the chart where it talks about psychopathology, modern psychologists don't buy any of this, right? But I just put this is on there as a reference, the idea that, like, you might get schizophrenia or paranoia or depression if you don't resolve the oral stage. Schizophrenia, we've pretty much determined is 8 specific genetic diseases that may have some overlap. It's not because you didn't wean properly, right? But again, this is just for, like, educational purposes of what Freud thought. All right, the anal stage, one of the more famous ones here. About 3 to 4 years at the top here. And pleasure in Freud's mind here is being derived from the anal sphincter. There's a greater focus on defecating because children begin potty training. They can't just poop where they want to anymore, right? They convert this involuntary behavior to a voluntary behavior. Prior to that, kids are not like thinking, I'm gonna pee now, right? It just happens. And they start to learn to control that. And this is their first attempt to try to control an instinctual impulse. The id is not winning for the first time. And that can be really, really hard, is what they argue. They can derive praise from their parents for completing potty training. And then traditionally, although I think a lot of people are moving away from this, but the punishment would often target the buttocks, which would be spanking. Again, if you refer to your chart here, you're focused on both the anus and the urethra because urination is part of this as well. So retaining versus expelling. Am I gonna hold it in or am I gonna let it all out, right? We'll talk more about anal fixation later in this lecture, and some of the things that wrap up with that. The Erikson crisis here is autonomy versus shame and self-doubt or will. Do I have the ability to control this instinctual impulse? Can I learn to go to the bathroom? And there are kids who struggle with this beyond this stage. And even really awesome kids will sometimes just be so wrapped up, right, that they will just pee. Like, my daughter did that once at either 4 or 5. She had been potty trained for like 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden I was just like, did you just sit and tell me what? Did you pee? I peed. Okay, let's go take care of this. Right. So the character type here is anal. They tend to be very orderly, obstinate, I control. Again, this is about controlling those urges, right? Am I gonna hold it in? Am I gonna expel it? And it might be OCD or obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is like the type A personality. Everything has to be just so. Then we get to everyone's favorite, the phallic stage. Somewhere between 3 and 6 here, your focus is on your genitals. And again, a lot of folks are like, what? Genitals at this young? But if anyone's ever like babysat kids this age, or like I used to substitute teach at my mom's preschool, and these kids don't know what this means sexually, but they sure like to explore their genitals because they feel good, right? So like when I was helping with nap time, we'd have to be like, keep your hands above the blanket, right? And so like parents should talk to their kids about, that might feel good physically, but that's something we do in private, right? So you're focusing on pleasurable physiological sensations, and some conflictual feelings can definitely arise. This is the age at which children start noticing the difference between boys and girls. This might be when they play doctor, or they're like, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine, right? That type of thing. And Freud's idea is that these kids might be fantasizing about sexual acts and masturbating. Again, I think they masturbate. I don't believe that, like, kids don't have a concept of sex at this time, which is why oftentimes when they're sexually abused around this age, they can't articulate what happened, right? So yeah, not so much. If we look at our chart here, we see exploration, manipulation, curiosity, playing, all good things, right? They start to identify with adult role models. We're going to talk about the Oedipal conflict in just a slide. Initiative versus guilt here, or purpose, was the Ericksonian crisis. So the idea is, how are parents going to react to these things? So they're going to be like, don't ever touch yourself there, it's dirty. Or again, like sort of explaining, yes, that might feel good, but that's something we do, like and not around other people. So are they making them feel guilty? There is a phallic character that's daring, seductive, and vain. There's like a lack of purpose. And this is where Freud did a bunch of his work, because this is where they believed hysteria came from, was a not good resolution at this stage. And this is also where phobias were supposed to come in, and paraphilias are those sexual, I don't even want to say disorders, but essentially they're things like pedophilia, flashing, frotterism, which is like rubbing yourself on unconsenting people. All right, so the Oedipus complex, again, this in particular is the biggest reason why students of Freud, people who agree with him on just about everything else, would be like, no, man, like this isn't right. No one was as into this as Freud. And so the idea comes from a Greek tragedy called Oedipus, written by Sophocles. In this Greek tragedy, Oedipus is banished as a child, doesn't know his history, comes back and kills his dad and marries his mom. He's unaware of these taboos that he has transgressed, and when he finds out, learns about his deeds, he intentionally blinds himself. So, really uplifting tale. And so what Freud said is that children have this unconscious desire to be like Oedipus and marry their opposite sex parents and do away with the same sex parent because they're competition. Even Freud thought this was not necessarily literally sexual. It's the unconscious wish to, and again, let's take it in the Oedipal way, the boy attracted to mom way. It's the unconscious wish to have his mother all to himself by eliminating the competition, eliminating dad. Dad is a competitor for mom's attention. And again, we need to situate this in the fact that Freud's mom was hot, apparently. His dad was 20 years older than his mom. Right? So people's experiences influence their theories for sure. So again, if we think about where was he getting this idea besides his attractive mother, right? Boys are sometimes very fond of their mothers. There's a whole social media trend of being like a boy mom, right? Things along those lines. And girls are often like daddy's little girl, things along those lines. Freud took this a step further, and the reason that this could be linked to the formation of phobias is he said that boys experience castration anxiety as a result of this. They fear that the dad will take away their penis so that the child can never be with the mother. And again, this wasn't necessarily literal, that they thought dad would like come at them with a knife. But figurative, if we think about the penis as a phallus instead, sort of this representative thing. So what happens, Freud says, is that this little boy decides that the best he can do is to become like this guy who has his mom. He needs to be like his father. Freud called this identification. Identification, and the idea was you start identifying with the same-sex parents, and that marks the beginning of the resolution of this Oedipal conflict and successful resolution of this phallic stage. So there was this idea that it was like a mixture of love and affection for the dad, but also being afraid of his father's reprisals. The really interesting thing is that Freud considered the Oedipal complex universal. He said there's no difference for girls. They just identify with mom, and that's it. However, one of Freud's students, Carl Jung, thought it's different enough that we should probably give it a different term, and so he came up with the term Electra complex. Again, another figure from myth who had some serious dad issues. And so the idea here is that there are also conflicts for girls, and in particular they thought the conflict for girls was penis envy. Girls figure out that boys have the penis, the phallus, and they feel inferior because they do not have the phallus. Not having a penis is their version of castration anxiety, so penis envy and castration anxiety were supposedly sort of equivalent. So the girl then blames her mother for the lack of a penis. She desires her father, yet at the same time envies him for having a penis. And Freud was pretty vague about how girls resolve the conflicts of the phallic stage. He was just sort of like, and then it's gone. So again, boys will go through this process of identification with their fathers to overcome their wishes from their mothers, and eventually girls will identify with their mothers to overcome penis envy, to overcome their anger at not having a phallus. And Freud argued that having successfully resolved this conflict at all of 6 years old, both boys and girls are then prepared to later seek out members of the opposite sex for marriage and procreation. It's good to go. Again. Sure. Okay, Freud. Then you have the latency period, and this is from age 6 to puberty. So this is when kids are usually like kindergarten, first grade, right up through like middle school. And Freud argued there's little psychological development here. So ironic because there's so much psychological development and social development that happens at this stage. But he argues that what kids are doing here is focusing on learning the skills and abilities to take the role of an adult. Freud believed there were no conflicts at this phase. This was a time of rest and latency, which is why he called it the latency period. The idea was that kids would focus on school and they weren't attracted to other kids. This is the like, you cooties phase, right? So there was no associated erogenous zone here. The modes of tension discharge, if we looked at the chart, were categorized, classified, cooperation, competition, problem solving, maybe being a little self-centered. They start expanding their social contacts, making more friends. The Ericksonian crisis here is industry versus inferiority. How do they measure up to other kiddos? Right? Oh, well, Johnny's better than me at math. Maybe I'm not that great, but I'm better than Johnny at softball, right? Something along those lines. And so it's sort of figuring out what they're good at, what other kids are good at. And there was just no fixation at this stage. That's why there's a bunch of NAs on the chart. Is Freud was like, you don't get fixated here, there's nothing to get fixated on because there's not a zone associated with this. Then there's the genital period. So this is around the age of puberty. Freud says with puberty, there's the return of overt sexual and aggressive desires and the emergence of interest in the opposite sex. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, but that we should pause and acknowledge here is this is very heteronormative, right? There's no assumption for any sort of queer relationship here. And this is partially because of how extra taboo homosexuality was at the time, right? But it's interesting to still sort of think about that in this context. So your sexual needs would be satisfied through socially acceptable means. Maybe you start courting, as they would do as dating, right? The libido here is focused on the genitals themselves. And Freud argued that there was no specific conflict at this stage. You only get here if you resolve your conflicts at all the other stages. One of the best metaphors, I think, for fixation is to think of it as, think of your mental energy as an army. And at each of these conflictual stages, there's a battle. If the resolution of that stage is incomplete, some of your soldiers have to stay behind at that stage to monitor that particular conflict. It's as if some psychic energy must stand guard, lest the psychological or psychosexual conflict break out again. The poorer the resolution, the more of your psychic energy or these soldiers you have to leave behind. One consequence of this is that you then have less psychic energy available to bring forward for your subsequent tasks of development and maturity. So the more of your psychic energy, the more of these soldiers you can bring forward to the genital stage, the more psychic energy can be invested in mature intimate and productive relationships, and the better the adult personality adjustment. To Freud, successful personality development meant the ability to be productive, but also to maintain loving relationships. According to Freud, personality development is largely complete at the end of the Oedipal stage, so around age 6. The adult personality is dependent on how the conflicts that arise during infancy and childhood are resolved. And again, if we're trying to give Freud some credit and wrap this around, there are really interesting studies now about adult attachment. So sort of how as an adult you interact within your romantic relationships, and how that is often related to your attachment to your parents growing up. So again, if we look at the chart for our final time today, we've got kids 12 and up. All of the previous zones come into play, but particularly the genitalia. So now we're talking control, rebellion, sexuality, all those fun puberty things, right? And again, Freud's idea is here, you're going to establish intimate relationships and start contributing to society. Erikson's crisis here is identity versus role diffusion, or fidelity. So who am I? Who am I going to be? And sort of what implications does that have for me? So there is a genital character type, but it's just being well adapted, essentially. These people are working, loving, and sexual. I am for myself and for others. So this idea that like I exist within a community and I acknowledge that. So magic, you've gotten through them all. Now you're all better, right? Unless something went wrong previously. According to Freud, going through all these stages, this trajectory was not negotiable. Basically Freud said it's inevitable. We must negotiate these stages of development despite these crises and obstacles presented at each of the stages. Individuals who experience those problems along the way will have adult personality characteristics that are represented by that stage. So those last 4 columns of that chart we've been looking at. And so this plays into Freud's theory of neurosis. And again, remember that neurosis is an old word that can be used as an overarching term to kind of refer to any sort of internalizing disorder, anxiety, depression, disordered eating, things along those lines. But in this particular case, we're really focusing on anxiety. So this is sort of Freud's theory of anxiety. So Freud argued that at times there's these unconscious conflicts between the id, the ego, and the superego that can lead to anxiety, and that those could tie in to these psychosexual stages. You've got some sort of intrapsychic conflict, that's going to lead to anxiety. Freud distinguished 3 different types of anxiety. Reality anxiety is objective anxiety. This is fear of real dangers in the external world. You're sleeping and someone pulls the fire alarm, right? You don't know someone pulled it, so you wake up like, right? Sort of panicked. That's reality anxiety, right? That you are feeling true anxiety that like this sound means there could be a fire and I don't want to die, right? From reality anxiety, Freud argued, are derived 2 other types of anxiety. Moral anxiety is the fear of your conscience. So an individual with a well-developed superego tends to feel guilty when they do something wrong, or even if they think about doing something wrong, or something that is contrary to the moral code. So this has a basis in reality anxiety for Freud, because when you're growing up our parents or other caregivers can punish us for violating a moral code. An example of moral anxiety might be you think about cheating on an exam. You haven't even cheated yet, but you feel anxious. That's moral anxiety. Now, the really interesting thing is one of the things that people with antisocial personality disorder, people we call psychopaths, lack is moral anxiety. They do not get anxious, like I'm assuming everyone in this room does, when they think about doing something wrong. Neurotic anxiety is your fear that the id instincts will get out of control and cause you to do something that you'll be punished for. So this is the fear that your id instincts will go rampant, go full Cookie Monster, get out of control, and cause you to do something you'll be punished for. And again, this can have a basis in reality anxiety because parents and caregivers may have punished the child in the past for impulsive actions. So for Freud, anxiety is a state of unpleasant tension. It can act as a signal of true impending danger or of sort of this more abstract psychological impending danger. Anxiety signals to the ego that it must take appropriate measures to reduce tension. If the ego doesn't do so, the danger may increase to the point where the ego is overthrown by the id and doesn't have control anymore. Typically, the ego can handle it. It can handle the anxiety by taking realistic steps, realistic measures. If the ego can't handle the anxiety, it can result to unrealistic measures, including defense mechanisms, which we'll talk about in a few slides. And the idea is if you're in a state of anxiety, you're going to be experiencing not optimal adjustment, right? You might have one of these personality fixations, or it might manifest as something like hysteria, where you have a physical symptom that doesn't seem to have physical causes. So how do all these things fit together? Well, let's say the child is exhibiting some sort of sexual or aggressive impulses. Kids do this, especially with aggressive. And then the child is punished for those impulses. So those sexual or aggressive impulses may be strongly punished and blocked by extreme external dangers or threats. So intensive parental punishment, even, again, often perceived, not reality, but the idea that like your parents have withdrawn your love, right? Last night, my kiddo was taking a lot of time after her shower. And I was like, come on, speed it up. And she was like, I'm a bad daughter. You don't love me. Oh, child. You know, it's like you have to try not to laugh sometimes and reassure her, no, I just need you to do what I ask you to do. Right? This can lead to that reality anxiety. The child may become afraid that their impulses will lead to severe punishment and or loss of parental love. So in time, they'll begin to fear their own impulses and try to repress those impulses, not let them out, put them under that sensor, that screen door, right? Okay. There we go. So that's where reality anxiety comes up. And you repress those unacceptable impulses. The problem is when you're repressing those impulses, unless you find a way to express them in some acceptable way, they become pent up and increasingly difficult to repress. They're pushing up against that sensor, right? When the sensor is not necessarily that strong. So later you'll have a partial breakdown of the repression. Stuff will start to leak out, essentially, psychologically. And neurotic anxiety emerges. This signals that the repressed impulses are starting to break through. And if expressed, they will usually be expressed in some disguise or symbolic format. So again, maybe the person's really anxious and they don't know why. Maybe they have, again, what was called hysteria, we would now call like a somatoform disorder, where this anxiety is physically presenting itself as like feeling like you can't move a limb or something along those lines. The other thing that might happen is that the defense mechanisms may develop. So we have fixation. What is fixation? It's the neurotic lives today as if it were yesterday. This is a quote from Erich Fromm, another psychodynamic theorist. The idea is that we've left some of those mental soldiers earlier, and our conflict is not successfully resolved for one of those psychosexual stages. And there's a certain amount of frustration and anxiety associated with each developmental stage, as we've seen as we walked through these. If that amount of frustration and anxiety is roughly proportional to the gratification they receive at that stage, things are fine, and the individual will just progress to the next developmental stage. If the amount of frustration or anxiety is not roughly proportional, it's out of proportion with the amount of gratification, this is where you might have normal growth being temporarily halted, or again, leaving some mental energy back at that stage. And this is called fixation, and it occurs in two conditions. One is they received too little gratification during a stage of development, so they're afraid to move on to the next stage. An example is a psychodynamic interpretation of anorexia nervosa, was that it was thought to occur in response to too little gratification during the oral stage. You didn't have enough gratification at the oral zone, and so you develop this disorder where you don't eat. If the individual received too much gratification during this developmental stage, there's little or no motivation to move on. Why should I move on? Things are great here, right? If you're fixated at a stage, things have gone wrong, right? Your world is not meeting your needs, so you're kind of going back to this other stage. And it can lead to a whole host of issues. So for example, they talk about oral fixation as something that can lead you to like leech on to relationships, or acting like a 1-year-old, being really insecure, or other things that are related to oral. So maybe you chew on your pens or pencils, or maybe you smoke. The anal stage, there are sort of two sides of the coin here. The one we tend to think of is anal retentive, holding stuff in, right? These are those people who have type A personality. They want something really ordered. They have their shit together, right? Their stubbornness, kiss my ass. I mean, these phrases are not on accident, right? These ideas related to people being very perfectionistic and uptight are related to Freud's theories because it does seep into all of sort of popular culture. You can, however, also be anal repulsive. And these are people who are really messy, just kind of let stuff go, very blasé. If you've ever seen the play or the movie The Odd Couple, there's one member who is anal retentive and the other is anal repulsive, and they're roommates. So you can imagine how well that goes, right? One person's really messy and the other person's super uptight. So lots of that happening. All right, we'll stop there for today. We'll start talking about defense mechanisms on Friday. And like I said, I will have the clarified schedule for you all on Friday.